Welcome to our second Letting Library Lecture Series of 2023 entitled The Councilors. This year, we are celebrating the City of Milwaukee's 120th anniversary of incorporation. Our town is officially recognized as 120 years old. This does not mean people and life did not call this place home before then, but it is the date the state recognizes our existence. Tonight, we have assembled some of the most influential councilors of Milwaukee's history. We will begin the lecture with a special address from Dr. Steve Bennett about the Milwaukie Museum, then from Scott Stauffer, our great city recorder, on the history of the council, and lastly, we will discuss with former councilors Abma, Hyzy, and Parks about being a councilor, their triumphs and their failures, and their influence they had on our city, not only from the time they served, but to the future of our residents. Unfortunately, Councilor Kazabadi was unable to attend because of a death in the family. My name is Greg Heemer. I am the Communications Director for the Milwaukie Historical Society. Before we get started, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Steve Bennett, Milwaukie Historical Society President. Steve Bennett devotes his time to working with individuals and organizations who share his love of history at the individual and local level. He works with historical societies in Clackamas County to further their mission of collecting and preserving our collective artifacts and stories. He works with individuals to help them discover their past as a way to enlarge their future. Dr. Bennett has a wide-ranging academic background, a BA in philosophy, an MA and a PhD in Near Eastern languages, an MBA in management. He worked in information technology as a project manager for 30 years and is now currently retired. Over the past several years, Dr. Bennett has focused his attention on local property research, helping many individuals uncover the things they did not know about the places and people who contributed to making them who they are today. It is funny how the universe works sometimes. Steve came in wandering around the museum looking for research on his home, looking for articles about Mr. King, the original owner of his house. Over time, Steve developed with us a bond, a friendship, maybe even a love. Today, because of a few visits, Steve brings his intellect, knowledge, and experience to our board. We are ever so thankful to have him as a volunteer. Please welcome Dr. Steve Bennett.
Thank you, Greg. I think it's interesting, in light of tonight's topic, that the Mr. King that Greg was referring to is Patrick King, whose house we're renting and living in. Though the Kings only lived here from 1911 to 1917, he was a city councilor from 1912 to 1915 during the time of E.T. Elmer, the third mayor of Milwaukie. So it's one of these things that I uncovered and I find fascinating. So again, my name's Steve Bennett. I go by Steve, not Dr. Bennett. And I am president of the Milwaukie Historical Society, the owners and operators of the only museum, the world's largest museum in Milwaukie, dedicated to the history of this city. We're located at 3737 Southeast Adams, and we're open from 1 to 5 on Saturdays. Yes, it's a museum. It's in Milwaukie. It's that one that you keep driving by every day for 15 years and never stop in at. And we hear that almost every week when people come by. I've been going by here for years. Trust me, it is worth your time to stop by. And and to learn more about the past from our perspective. The Milwaukie Museum prides itself in telling the stories of the past, no matter whether that's good, bad, or ugly. It's all important. To us, we work with organizations like the Oregon Black Pioneers, Clackamas County Heritage Society, Japanese American Museum of Oregon, the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, to expand our knowledge and tell the histories of all the people who have lived in this area that we call Milwaukie. Membership dollars pay for our organization and for the museum. We keep our admission free so that we remove barriers of income inequality for those who want to come and learn about the city that we call Milwaukie. Last year, 2022, was a great year for us, engaging with the public and being open after COVID. We held, among other things, 4 performances at the museum, featuring kid-friendly performers, and we brought in over 400 people to enjoy those performances over the course of the year. We've started to digitize our photograph collection. We have been also interviewing the residents of Milwaukie, part of the Milwaukie 2023 project that was released, at least on YouTube, within the last couple of weeks, and has been getting a lot of notice. We held 4 library lectures last year, and we also brought back Christmas at the Museum, where Santa had the opportunity and the pleasure of greeting over 150 families, friends, and adorable others to the museum for that particular day. We are funded through donations and memberships. Consider becoming a member today. An individual is $20. For businesses, it's $100. By becoming a member, you get information about upcoming events, member-only gatherings, and the opportunity that the museum has to offer to you. For a business membership, that also provides advertising of your organization, and it also ensures that, that you have the opportunity to work with us in contributing to the overall history of Milwaukie and our ability to help that business portray that. Either way, your dollars will help ensure that you are preserving Milwaukee's history for future generations, and you are contributing to the wonderful programming like tonight's presentation. Check our website at www.milwaukeemuseum.com to join or stop in at the museum. Thank you to all the residents and contributors, past, present, and future, for your continued support. So.
Thank you, Steve. I'll call you Steve now. That
You usually do.
right? Yeah. Dr. Bennett's just a lot to roll out of my mouth sometimes. So this program is produced by our great partner, Willamette Falls Studio. Willamette Falls Studio's mission is to inspire lifelong learning, advance the knowledge, and define communications through digital media technology to educate and strengthen our communities. Their professional staff work daily to create media content for local organizations, capture city projects, consult on productions, customize broadcast systems, and provide technical support. Residents can learn how to be a community producer at little to no out-of-pocket cost. Come in and talk to their staff about how they can help you with your communication needs. Willamette Falls Studios, where you learn, create, and belong. One of our partners also in programming tonight is the wonderful Lenning Library. The Seeds of Thanks Seed Library is available to LINCC Library cardholders. The Seed Library was started using the seeds from our past seed swaps and some purchased with the help of the Friends of the Lenning Library. To expand the Seed Library, we are gladly accepting commercial seed packs as donations. Open pollinated and non-GMO seeds are preferred. We encourage you to learn seed saving and welcome easily saved seeds. Come to the library and select up to 10 seed plant varieties from the Seeds of Thanks cabinet. On the Seeds of Thanks envelope, write the plant name, variety, and planting notes for each seed type. Place your selected seeds into the envelopes, then take them out to the staff for checkout. That's all it takes. There is no due date on seeds, but we encourage you to donate back to the seed library any commercial surplus seeds to the library or saved from your garden. We encourage you to learn seed saving. We welcome saved seeds of the following open and pollinated varieties: beans, leaf lettuce, peas, peppers, chard, spinach, tomatoes, borage, cilantro, dill, parsley, pot marigolds, sweet Sicily, California poppies, pink dianthus, snapdragons, sunflowers, and sweet peas. And if you didn't write all those down, check it out on the city website, on the library website. Open pollinated and non-GMO seeds only, please. Donation slips are available at the library or find it online at milwaukeeoregon.gov/library/seed library. Scott Stauffer is truly one of the best employees City of Milwaukie has. Being a local, he graduated from Roosevelt High School and went on to obtain his master's in public policy at Oregon State University. He joined the city recorder's office in 2013 as an administrative specialist, and after retirement of his beloved boss, Pat Duvall, he was awarded the position of city recorder. Mr. Stauffer and his wife Sarah, along with two very active boys, live here in Milwaukie. Even though his love of baseball and bow ties are all over his social media page, his happiness and devotion to the city is second to none. Scott and I have interacted on various, sometimes feelings like thousands of activities, and bonded over our love of history. It is truly amazing when you meet a kindred soul, someone who understands a passion and is willing to discuss the passion in a reciprocal way. We could spend days locked in a room talking about Milwaukee history and probably the history of mankind, but we know our wives would never allow it. But Scott shares the passion of Milwaukee's museum mission and supports it more than we could ever appreciate. There are two things I really admire about Scott. One, that he always answers an email within 2 hours. Two, and the most important, is the time he takes away from his busy family life to help us organize, set up and take down this room, run the Zoom, and bring in out equipment for every Letting Library lecture series. Scott, thank you is never, ever enough for all you do, your support, and willingness to deal with my antics, but thank you. Here to give us a history lesson on Milwaukee City Council is the best city recorder we've ever had. He'll debate that, Scott Stauffer.
Whew. How am I to follow that introduction? I do not know. But good evening, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. And that very warm introduction, thank you so much, Greg. As was introduced, my name is Scott Stauffer, and I have the honor to serve as our great city's 24th city recorder. Thank you to Greg and the Historical Society for organizing tonight's Heritage Lecture and the entire series, which happens 4 times in the year, so watch for the ones coming up in June and October. We at City Hall know how valuable our friendship is with the Society. We greatly value the time, the energy, the resources, and the institutional memory that the museum volunteers bring to our community. We look forward to many more years of projects and events together. Greg, the sentiments are hearty and return to you likewise. Before I begin, I also want to thank the aforementioned city recorder before me, our 23rd city recorder, Pat Duvall, who compiled the highlights of the first 50 years of the city council meetings, which I tapped on and relied on heavily for tonight's presentation. Okay, as was suggested, one of my favorite subjects to talk about, and I know there's no timer, so forgive me, but the city council, the history of the city council of the city of Milwaukee, initially referred to as the Common Council. a few opening remarks. When I set out to compile this history, I started with the familiar names and dates, many provided by Pat's notes. But as I went along, it occurred to me that the history of the City Council is not really about those seated at the dais. I mean, there have been big personalities to sit on in those seats, but really the story of the council is the story of Milwaukie, about the things that happened here. Our focus tonight is the shared story through the council's actions, yes, but it's important to remember that those decisions are the people's story, the people who elected council and the people who ran for those offices. The notes and stories I will share tonight are just a very tip of the iceberg in terms of the agendas and the projects, the programs, policies, reports, contracts, agreements, ordinances, resolutions, issues, and decisions that our city's elected leaders have addressed over the last 120 years. Many stories have been lost to time. Some stories are, frankly, not interesting enough to relive. Many are heartfelt moments of community unity. Some reflect heated and ugly disagreements. Many are shockingly familiar to themes you hear today at council meetings. So starting with the numbers, 5. From the very beginning, the Milwaukie City Council has had 5 members, all elected to staggered 4-year terms. In the 1920s to the 40s, we dabbled with wards or districts, but for the most part, the mayor and our 4 councilors have been elected at large, all the city voters voting for all 5 positions. As of January 2023, 147 individuals have served on council. There have been 226 swearing-in ceremonies, 54 the results of appointments to the city council, and 172 the result of elections. So now, the stories, the timetable. And it all began in 1903, February 1903, that is, when the Oregon State House of Representatives passed an act incorporating our city as a town of Milwaukie at the time, and Governor George Chamberlain signed the bill. Interestingly, it took the state Senate 2 years to concur with that bill. Also in February of 1905, that took place, but by then we were 2 years down the road, and I don't know if Milwaukie paid much attention. As has been mentioned earlier, May 21st is Dogwood Day. May 21st is the date listed on our city seal as the date of incorporation. I cannot tell you why May 21st was selected. Somehow in the story, they created a seal, and that was the date that stuck. My working theory is that was perhaps the date of our first election. And so in May-ish of 1903, the first election was held, and the first 5 individuals were elected to council. And on June 2nd, 1903, the very first city council meeting was held in rented space in a building that once stood at the corner of Main and Jefferson Street. If you're familiar with where Cha 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 Mexican Taqueria is, I believe it was a building across the street from that, perhaps on the block where the Wonderland building, what used to be a theater, stands. It was the Woodsman of the World building, the WOW building, and we rented space, the city rented space in that building for most of the first decade as our first city hall. At that first meeting, they elected Owen Roberts to be council president. Owen Roberts would turn out to be the patriarch of a family that gave multifold back to our very city. His daughter would be Nell Martin, who would go on to serve as our last elected recorder and first appointed recorder, and his son Fred Roberts would serve as mayor during World War II. They elected Owen as council president. They established committees, because you can't run a government without committees, and they considered a couple taxes, a business tax and a poll tax. They didn't adopt either at that meeting, but they considered it, and to remedy the city's initial financial problem or need, they each donated $1 to the city to get things going. They did get them back eventually, and then they agreed to get a city seal, and they had what the minutes call a very interesting discussion about who to hire as a city attorney and whether certain attorneys were worthy of being the city's lawyer. Within that first month of being an organized city and a city council, they passed the very first ordinance, the first law of the city of Milwaukie, Ordinance 1, which regulated the storage of gunpowder, dynamite, and all other explosives. The impetus, there were many things that led to a city being incorporated, but for Milwaukie, the impetus was the railroad's habit of storing very dangerous explosive things along a railroad line near downtown. And as unfortunately we know in current events, that's all too real a situation today. But that's what drove Milwaukie to organize. Other things they did in those first initial meetings in 1903 was they took steps to build sidewalks downtown. I understand that they were wooden, and then to install sewer lines also in what is downtown, many of which were probably just only recently replaced in the last few years. So moving into what I call the town years, in July 1906, they initiated a dog licensing program, which some derisively at the time called a dog tax. And also in 1906, council established the Milwaukie Volunteer Fire Department. In 1909, at the end of 2 terms, the council, after the 2 terms, they passed their first council resolution honoring Mayor William Schindler, who did not seek re-election and was retiring. And so the first council resolution, known as R1 1909, thanked Mayor Schindler, who is pictured there, for his service to the city. On May 11th of 1909, the council was caught in what the minutes record as one of the first turf battles in Milwaukie. The Mothers and Teachers Club and the city's fire department both thought that a room called the reading room, and it's not clear to me if the reading room was in the city hall building or somewhere else in downtown, but a reading room had been built, and both groups thought that that was for them. Council and the city had built this reading room for them. Well, council was put in the position of choosing between the mothers and teachers and the firefighters. And much to the firefighters' chagrin, the council sided with the mothers and teachers. In December 1914, the first woman ran for city council. Maggie A. Johnson ran and lost, but as the minutes say, quote, not too badly. Which is something to think about, because if I'm correct, and I might be wrong, I believe Oregon had only given women the right to vote in 1912. So fairly quickly, Milwaukeeans, women in Milwaukie took up that opportunity. In October 1915, the council voted to put up street signs and install modern toilets in the city hall and directed staff to fill up the one that was outside. No word on where that one was. In July 1916, on a note that may sound familiar to folks who are observing council in the last couple meetings, council passed a ban on firecrackers. July 11th, 1916, perhaps just a week after a certain national holiday. Moving on with the town years, in 1917, the Milwaukie Police Department was established, which enhanced, we gave a couple more patrol officers to the elected town marshal position at the time. In 1919, a theme that Greg has mentioned in several discussions over the years and pops up in our history, boxing was a very big thing here. And in September 1919, the council established a boxing committee to help manage the events that were occurring at the Car Barn Arena, which was located on what is now a parking lot across the street from City Hall. By November of that year, 1919, in follow-up to that boxing committee, the mayor was authorized by council to, quote, appoint 6 good men and deputy marshals to be on duty from 7:00 p.m. Tuesday night, the 25th day of November, 1919, until the boxing contests are over and the crowd dispersed, and that they are paid the sum of $5 each for their services. Clearly, Milwaukie was expecting a crowd that weekend for a big boxing match. And then in September of 1921, the first budget committee was formed. And again, 2 months after that, in November 16th, 1921, council adopted what appears to be the first city budget. Lord help whoever was there before keeping track of the money, but they had a budget 18 years later. The budget totaled $6,444, broken down to a general fund of $2,817, a street fund of $985, a fire department of $997, and a contingency fund of $500. The remaining budget were dedicated to just 3 salaries in 1921. The recorder made $480, the marshal made $420, and the treasurer $240. That's the first budget. In 1924, Edith Hazen became the first woman elected to the city council, and that's a picture of Councilor Hazen there. In December 1925, council is recorded as having their first discussion about a municipal garbage service. They instructed the street superintendent to use the city truck to gather all non-combustible rubbish that residents were asked to put out on the curb on the first Tuesday of each month. In the similar effort to clean up Milwaukie, in November of 1926, council adopted Ordinance 255, requiring those not on the sewer system, connected to the sewer's utility system there, to install septic tanks, as outdoor facilities would no longer be allowed. We were moving on up in the world. Everything was moving inside. In August 1938, the city's third city hall, was finished, and the current City Hall, third and current City Hall was finished, and the first council meetings were held in that building. On November 28th, 1938, the Planning Commission was established. The Planning Commission and the Budget Committee of our 13 standing committees today date to be the oldest ongoing committees. On November 13th, 1939, the 500th City Council meeting was held. On September 9th, 1940, this would be the start of several of these little notes that are tied together under the heading of housing. On September 9th, 1940, Council executed an agreement with the Clackamas County Housing Authority to develop and administer a low-rent housing project consisting of approximately 100 units of what would come to be called the Kellogg Park Housing Development. On a related note, about 8 months later, on May 7th, 1941, at an election, Milwaukie voted 3-1 against a housing project, and as a result of that, the council asked the federal government to stop the project. But that's not the end of the story. A little detour, because in 1941, you may be familiar, World War II brought the United States in. The United States went into World War II, and in January of that year, so January of 1942, just a month after Pearl Harbor, the council discussed maintaining an aircraft warning observation post in Milwaukie. And during that discussion, Mayor Fred Roberts offered to send his office stove to heat the post. And following up on that, on May 25th, council approved the construction of an aircraft observation tower on city property located at 40th and Harvey. And if you're familiar with city properties, we continue to own 40th and Harvey today. It's home to some old public works storage and facilities, an old fire station there, and across from that is the Water Tower Park. And it's my understanding that a predecessor water tower was actually part of that air observation tower. So we come to 1944, which if you're a nerd of local government and city history, it is a seminal moment in our city's history. The charter changed. And with that change came the council manager form of government, which we continue to enjoy today. At that election, hearkening back to the housing notes I gave a moment ago, voters at that election approved the annexation of Kellogg Park housing development into the city, bringing to a close the discussion and the back and forth about the city's support for affordable housing. But that 1944 charter change set these pieces in motion. The council became less the day-to-day operations that they had played since 1903. They became the policymakers who hire 3 people. They hire the city manager, they hire the city attorney, and they hire the municipal court judge. The city manager, therefore, administers day-to-day operations and carries out policies, and much of that day-to-day operations is carried out by folks that the city manager hires. The city attorney represents the city in all legal matters. The municipal court judge oversees the court and the administration of local justice and administration of violations of the municipal code. The other significant change in this charter change was the position of recorder, thankfully, went from being an elected position to appointed by the city manager. By the following year, 1945, council hired the first city manager, Louis D. Kelsey, and the first municipal court judge, G.W. Thiessen. On August 25th, 1947, in a move that may also sound familiar to recent events, council passed a resolution in support of forming a North Clackamas recreational district. A couple years later, in 1955, council rescinded that support. Moving into the mid-century, on January 11th, 1950, council declared that there was no longer a shortage of rental housing in Milwaukie and rent control was no longer necessary. 1950, you think that's post-war boom, and so you kind of think that's one of the eras in time when Milwaukie saw a lot of growth, and that probably spurred that action. And at the picture here, you see the top right, that is a photo of the northern end of Milwaukie, the area that would largely come to be where the Kellogg Park development was at one point, before it moved, the housing that moved across the railroad tracks to closer to Providence Milwaukie Hospital. Let's see, on April 13th, 1953, council adopted Ordinance 579, which required all persons engaged in revealing or attempting to reveal the future events in another's life to get a license. That's right, the city taxed fortune telling. On September 14th, 1953, this is an interesting little anecdote, and there are probably several conclusions, things you can take away from it, but On September 14th, 53, the police chief reported to council that there had been complaints about children buying cigarettes from cigarette vending machines. In response, council voted and directed staff to drop an ordinance banning cigarette vending machines. Seems pretty reasonable. However, within the same month, 2 weeks later, in response to that action, members of the cigarette vending machine community were so convincing that council shouldn't ban the machines because that was not a solution to the problem of minor smoking, that no ordinance was therefore drafted and adopted. Interesting little tidbit there. On November 9th of 1953, a delegation from the Milwaukie Historical Society, I think perhaps one of the first times the Historical Society appears in the council record, asked for council's attitude on keeping relics and replicas which are of particular interest to Milwaukie. The argument was also convincing because council agreed to cooperate with the Historical Society to maintain relics and replicas of Milwaukie, and we're very proud to continue that today. On November 8th, 1954, I don't know that this is the start of this long-term project. That will sound very familiar, but a C.V. Crispin came before council and requested that Jefferson Street be surfaced with hard topping from the westerly end of the present improved surface to the water line for small craft to be launched. And I believe this might be one of the very first references to the Jefferson Street boat ramp, which would then evolve as Riverfront Park and Milwaukie Bay Park. Apparently, the idea was that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which continues to play a very heavy presence in that park's life, given the river, they would not keep the riverfront clear of logs if the city didn't pave the boat ramp. The council approved the request to pave the ramp if the city didn't have to pay more than a third of the whole project. On January 24th, 1955, a boxing and wrestling commission was established, and there wasn't a whole lot behind why that had to be if we already had a boxing commission, but to give wrestling its due, that was done. On July 12, 1960, council heard that the planning commission had recommended that the city rent riverfront land south of Jefferson Street, so south of the Jefferson Street boat ramp, for a park. Council approved a motion to negotiate with Publishers Paper Company, who owned the property south of Jefferson Street ramp, to rent the property for use as a park. And I think that probably was really one of the very first steps taken, which, as we all know, took decades to buy all the property along the riverfront to become Milwaukie Bay Park. Let's see, July 9th, 1962 was the date that, following a decade-long campaign by community groups, council adopted a resolution designating the Pacific Dogwood, Cornus Natali, as the city's emblem, and the Dogwood City of the West became our nickname. The dogwood, as folks in the room know, has featured on our logos ever since 1962. In 1961, Florence Ledding, a longtime Milwaukie community leader, passed away and left her home to the city for use as a library. By 1964, council had accepted the donation and overseen the reconstruction work to turn the Ledding home into a public library. And as we all know, that structure would remain in service from 1964 to 2017, when it was replaced by the beautiful new building that we are seated in this evening. On November 9th, 1964, the 1,000th council meeting was held. Just over 61 years took them to get 1,000 meetings in. In 1965, after much public debate, several elections on city finances, and the resignation of Mayor George P. Haley after less than a year in office, the council approved the first $1 million city budget. Went from $6,444 in 1921 to $1 million by 1960. I think it was 65, yeah. Also in the 60s, things that were in front of the city council included the very controversial decision by the Oregon Department of Transportation, then the Oregon Highway Commission, to pave and create the Milwaukie Expressway, which the fear at the time was that it would divide the city in two, and I think that may have been pretty correct. We are still today working on how we bridge that gap. Jumping ahead a little bit to November of 1980, Joy Burgess would become our first elected female mayor. And then another topic that was hot in the minds in the early 80s was this topic that I've talked to several folks about. It's just fascinating, the idea of consolidation and merger. It seemed to be a very popular idea that the city of Milwaukie should incorporate an annex with all the unincorporated areas in North Clackamas County, not including Gladstone. And at that time, Happy Valley was fairly far away on the other side of Mount Scott and very small. But everything else, perhaps from 205 to Gladstone, and should become one big city called the City of Clackamas. It seemed to have a lot of energy, and the City Council of Milwaukie seemed to be fairly in supportive of it, so much so that it took a really quick process to get the a ballot measure qualified on the ballot, and it was destroyed. It was just absolutely shot down 6-1 by folks in the city and outside the city. And that's an interesting story in of itself. And this political poster up there, Vote No Consolidation June 30, is just one of the most fascinating pieces in our archive because of it speaking to clearly the Cold War sentiment of the era, early 80s, and what folks thought one megacity would do. But the repercussions of that failed vote is fascinating when we think of how the North Clackamas region has governed itself ever since and continues to struggle in many ways with how we govern ourselves. It's had some really big impacts, but I think walking away from that election, a lot of local leaders who still found value in consolidating public services said, well, there's other things we can do. And the North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District was started in the early 90s, and by the end of the 90s, Milwaukie Fire was merged in with Clackamas Fire District. So there was some regionalization that happened, some things that would have been realized by the consolidation. In the late 80s, as the city's needs for more facility space grew, council approved the purchase and development of several properties, including what would become the Milwaukie Center at North Clackamas Park and the Public Works facility located at Johnson Creek Boulevard. Both properties required significant amount of annexation for the city to include that in the city limits. And they do today continue to form our very farthest northeast and southeast borders. And then in the early 90s, the other property they purchased was the public safety building there located at 3200 Southeast Harrison Street. So I'm going to move fairly quickly through the recent history because I know we've got honored guests who've listened to me ramble on for a few minutes long enough, and I'll just go over some of the bigger things. Of course, many other things happened since the year 2000. But at the turn of the century, there were several topics before council, including the continued acquisition of waterfront property for what would become Riverfront Park and now Milwaukie Bay Park, the construction of the TriMet's Orange Line, which really marked the return of light rail, commuter rail to the North Clackamas area. It had been in existence in Milwaukie from the 1890s until the 1950s, running from Portland to Oregon City, and then just on our northern border from Gulf Junction at the Waverly Junction all the way up to Estacada. So the return of a commuter line in the 2000s, 2012, 2015s when the line opened, and as folks in this room know, that was a fairly controversial thing that came to town. And then in 2003, of course, the city celebrated its 100th anniversary of incorporation. On February 20th, 2007, the City Council held its 2000th meeting. Council is currently at its 2,376th meeting. The 2010s, and again, I will defer to our esteemed former councilors here, but things that happened in the last decade, Elk Rock Island was annexed into the city. Clackamas Community College Harmony Campus was annexed into the city. And a Safe Access for Everyone program to build miles of sidewalks and paths was initiated, and work was done to continue to support and expand affordable housing in our city limits. On November 3rd, 2020, Desi Nicodemus became the first person of color elected to the City Council. And the last note I'll mention has dominated a lot of city staff's life recently and a lot of the attention of our City Council. We have purchased our 4th City Hall building. The former Adventist Credit Union building will become our 4th City Hall, scheduled as of this September 2023. So that's enough for me. Thank you for giving me your attention. Thank you for hearing this brief overview of city history. If there are any questions that I can answer for you now, I'm happy to do so, or I'm happy to talk offline as well. So, thank you very much.
That's why we love Mr. Stauffer. He actually knows all that stuff off the top of his head, and probably didn't really need his notes just to read through it. So while we are speaking about the city, I'd like to mention that City of Milwaukie is looking for volunteers to join boards and commissions. If you missed our February Letting Library lecture series entitled The Volunteers, you did not hear about the great reward there is to serving your community. Boards and commissions ranging from arts committees to tree board. There is always something that piques your interest. As a member of the Design and Landmarks Committee for 7 years and the Planning Commission for 9 years,
And you loved every minute.
I can tell you it is a vital way for you to interact with your local government. Quit complaining to your TV, the YouTube, the pilot, your partner, or even your dog or cat. Become a change agent for City of Milwaukee. Visit on board milwaukeeoregon.gov to file an application. The city is accepting applications until April 1st. Now, before I introduce our guest tonight, I just want to have the audience understand what makes these councilors so influential. A little bit of background. An ordinance is simply a law. A resolution is a firm decision to do or not do something. In other words, setting direction for ordinances or promises, and a proclamation is a recognition of a group, event, or occasion. That's all they are. Perspective is important. It generally takes a resolution to create an ordinance, and most ordinances take public input and lots and lots and lots of time. So look at our slide. Our guests served council from 2015 to 2022. The city during that time issued 97 ordinances, 525 resolutions, and 194 proclamations. So what does this mean? From 1959 to 2014, the council averaged 9.5 ordinances a year. From 2015 to 2022, they averaged about 14. From 1980 to 2014, the council averaged 43 resolutions per year. During the 2015-2022 council, they averaged 75 a year. Here's a staggering number, and no one should blame Scott Stauffer for this because, of course, he became the city recorder in 2016. But from 1980 to 2014, the council averaged 2 proclamations a year. From 2015 to 2022, 28 a year. I'd also like to remind you that there are only 26 council meetings per year. So what does this really mean? A lot of long hours of discussion, planning, meeting, and setting forth policies for generations to come. Tonight, I will ask our councilors, Shane Abma from 2017 to 2020, Kathy Hyzy from 2018 to 2022, and Wilda Parks from 2015 to 2020, to introduce themselves with a little bit of background and by answering the question, why did you become a councilor? Councilor Abma, please begin.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the library for hosting us and also the Milwaukie Historical Society for its work. It's awesome, and I am a member, and I love it, and thank you so much for what you do, Greg. Really, really appreciate it. And I have to correct the timing on that. It may have felt like 3 or 4 years, but I was only on for 2 years, so I ended in 2018. But I wanted to become a counselor. I had been on the plan. Do you want me to just ask why I wanted to become a counselor or background information first?
A little bit of both.
All right. Well, I've lived in the Portland area for 25 years, moved here from Kentucky, and for a job. I'm a lawyer, and I currently work at Metro Regional Government, which a lot of people still don't know what that is. It's not TriMed. It's not the Public Defender's Office. We have a regional government, and it is the only kind of government like it in the United States, which makes it a little unique. And in addition to working at Metro now, where I advise the recycling and garbage divisions and the housing division, and prior to that, I was at the city attorney's office in Portland, and then also city attorney's office for multiple small cities that aren't large enough to have their own city attorney in-house, so we would work on contractual basis. So that's what I have done, and I also spent a little time with Greg on the Planning Commission, and that's when I really started to get involved with the city of Milwaukie. I had moved here in 2008. I thought it was changing. I thought it was growing. I thought it was fascinating, and it was exciting times. And when I had a little time to start volunteering, I wanted to volunteer. And so I got on the Planning Commission. I had some background working for cities as a city attorney and doing some land use stuff. So I thought that was very interesting, and it was great to see that. And then after being on the Planning Commission for a couple of years, one of our councilors, Karen Power, was elected to the state legislature, which opened up her seat. And then I applied for the appointment for the city council. And so after that, I got the appointment and then ran to hold the seat and won and spent 2 wonderful years. And it's really interesting to sit here right next to Wilda because this is where we sat when we were on the city council. It was myself. And I got to hear such great stories and little comments that other people didn't get to hear. And she would whisper something, so it was awesome. And so I had a great time on the city council, and I will turn it over to who is next?
Kathy.
Why me? No.
Is it me? I don't,
Whomever.
well, we can have a conversation
We'll have a
amongst
conversation.
ourselves, 'cause that's what they'd like to see more of anyhow. Thank you. Again, I certainly echo what, I started to say counselor. I can call them counselors still, right? Aren't you supposed to call people by the highest title that they had? Okay. Anyhow, thanks for the library and the Historical Society for putting together things like this. I've lived in Milwaukie 25 years, almost 26 years now, and I had the great fortune when I first came here in 1998 to be the president and CEO of the North Clackamas County Chamber of Commerce. We covered about half of Clackamas County, which is unusual for a Chamber of Commerce. But through that, it gave me such tremendous opportunities that I just look back at that and go, wow, you just couldn't do anything like this anywhere else except through a Chamber of Commerce. But I met people from every walk of life. I met all the business people. I met legislators. I met, people that chaired committees in the state and national level and one thing and another. I had a great opportunity to kind of learn from the ground up. Also had the opportunity to share a lot of that learning with the citizens of Clackamas County when we put together, like my late friend Joe Crum and I designed the candidate training workshop, and we had Leadership Clackamas County, of which Suri Bernard is one of the graduates of that program. We had the Young Leaders Project where they graduated with the others. All of these kinds of things that came together to give me a foundation of community service and knowledge of people and relationship building. So when I left the Chamber of Commerce in 2012, after this chamber and two in California after 30 years of running chambers of commerce, believe me, I was beside myself. What am I going to do now? How can I find something to fill that void, right? I was still involved in a lot of community types of things, basically dealing with economic development, some dealing with politics and that. But a former city councilman, I will name him, Gregory Shamoff, said to me, you should be on our planning commission. You should put your application in for that. And I'm like, what? Why would I don't know about that. So I thought, I looked it up a little, found out a little bit about it, thought, yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. Did that. I think I was on there for maybe 3 years, something like that. And I got a phone call one day from Jeremy Ferguson, who had just been elected mayor for the second time. And he said, hey, Wilda, I want to tell you something. I need to vacate my seat and move to Seattle area, and I'd like you to put your hat in the ring for the mayor position. It's going to be an interim position, but who knows what that might lead to, da, da, da. And I'm like, I'm sorry, are you sure you know who you're talking to here? I don't know any of that kind of stuff. And I thought, and as he and I talked, and I got to thinking about it, and I thought, that does sound like a really good opportunity to use what I've gained in 30 years and knowledge of Milwaukie and the county and the area, and I knew what Metro was, so I figured that gave me a leg up right there, right? So I did that, thinking I can be the voice of the majority of the people of the city of Milwaukie. I live on Social Security. When I was working for the Chamber of Commerce, hey, it's a nonprofit organization that, depends on dues from members, so it's not one of the highest paying jobs around, but I had my house, I had a couple cats, I didn't have any kids that lived here, so, I thought, wow, I've built all these relationships, I know all these people, I think that I can help the city of Milwaukie and the residents in the city of Milwaukie by being their voice on this. So I put my hat in the ring. I was appointed mayor for an interim period and then appointed councilor to fill Mark Gamba's seat and then had to run for that seat. So I think I am the only person in the history of Milwaukie, maybe even in the state of Oregon, to have been sworn in 3 times in 1 year. And most people, let's face it, most people start by being a city councilor and then they sort of advance up and you become mayor, right? Well, I did it backwards. I figured, what the heck? But I found it so fascinating as I was sitting as mayor for those few months that I wanted to be able to continue. I could see the kinds of things that the city of Milwaukee was working on, and I thought, wow, I really want to be a part of that. And I'm a really nosy person by nature, so I figured that would get me in the middle of everything, you know. So I did that, continued on, and after 6 years serving on city council, I thought, you know, it's time to turn this over to somebody else and let some new eyes and some new ears guide this. And so I stepped aside and stepped down, and that's when Desi Nicodemus was elected. So that's how I got here. Thank you.
I guess I'm left, huh? My story is much less interesting than Wilda's, for sure. I ended up moving to Milwaukee in 2016. We bought our first house, and I noticed quickly that we were getting a newsletter from the city, which was a strange thing, and that there seemed to be a lot going on. And I took the opportunity when it was presented to apply for the Climate Action Plan Committee, and my application was accepted, and I often sat next to Shane at those meetings, and it was just a really wonderful experience of being in a community where people who live here really did have a voice and were really truly invited to the table to participate in governance and to help make big decisions. And it was just very exciting to be a part of that. So when I learned that Shane wasn't going to be running for his seat in, the election was in 2018, my term actually started in 2019, I was asked to consider running, and I said yes. I ran unopposed, and so there I was. And I got to sit next to Wilda for 2 years, which was every bit as fun as you would think it would be. So yeah, that's how I ended up here.
So for the audience and everybody out there in Zoom, I want to let you know that if you want to ask a question at any moment in time, just raise your hand. I'm going to be wandering around, Mick Jaggering the microphone, and kind of milling around the audience a little bit, giving my side profile because that's the best way to view me, and why we have this discussion. So at any point in time, just raise your hand. Doesn't matter what's going on. And Scott, if you see somebody raise their hand in Zoom, please let us know. So let's start off with this. Yes.
Thank you. As you were, Scott was talking about the history of Milwaukee, I just thought it would be fun for people to know that when we did the 100th celebration, 100-year celebration, and Ed Zumwalt and I served on that committee together, and God, what a great man he was, you know, and his, except for a couple of things, his vision for Milwaukee was really, really great, and he loved Milwaukee. But anyhow, there came a time when we're putting together this tableau of here's what happened in Milwaukee, and here's how everything grew and, you know, came to be and whatever. And you heard that there were 5 city councilors, or the mayor and city councilors, but they were all men, right? So Sharon Stone, I think, is that her last name? Sharon Stone, and Deborah Barnes had to dress as men for the skits that we did about the city of Milwaukee in its early days. So they had to pretend to be men with mustaches and all this stuff. It was hilarious, absolutely hilarious. I hope there's film somewhere, you know.
By the way, our Milwaukee Women's History Project, which will be coming out here in June, actually talks about that story and has the photograph of that as
good.
well. So,
Yeah, very good.
thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
So, during the Gamba reign, I love calling it the reign of the mayors. We had the Bernard reign, we had the Tomei reign. We just got through the Gamba reign. You all could be considered the most progressive council that we've ever had in the 120 years of council. And we can realize that Milwaukee, especially after light rail came, that life in Milwaukee was going to change, grow, and develop. So, Councilor Abma, do you think this assumption is actually true, or was it just circumstance or time to move the city forward?
I think that Milwaukee was going to grow and change regardless of the light rail, although that was certainly a factor. But it's too great of a community, and it's so close to downtown Portland. It's easy to get to. It was affordable compared to the surrounding areas, and so I think it was going to change anyway. And I think you can see, even in just my short time here in Milwaukee, the change in the demographics as well. And so I think it was going to change anyway. I think the light rail helped spur that on, if that's the question that you're asking.
Sure.
And it's just such a neat little community. It's got so much potential. I don't think the potential has been recognized in the downtown, and I certainly know it hasn't been recognized, say, on Milwaukie Bay Park and what that fabulous thing can be once we finally get that going. But it's just, and as you know, Greg, you've been a big part of the community for a long time and been a volunteer. It's got some people that are so dedicated to the city and what it does, and it's just fascinating to go to. I mean, you see a lot of the same faces because they're just at the same events because they're so dedicated. It's just a great community, and I knew it was going to change. I could see it changing in the short time that I was here, which is why I wanted to be a part of the change.
So, Councilor Hyzy, I actually bought my house in Milwaukee in 1996, and I said to myself, well, look at Selwood growing, man. My house is going to balloon. And let's see, I've been living here, and that balloon did not hit until 2015, 2016, right? That we start to see our property. So was it progressivism that drove it? Was it the market, or was it the people of Milwaukee themselves?
For us, our initial interest was certainly affordability. And I think that affordability is still bringing people to Milwaukee just in and of itself. But the first time you walk out the door and walk through the community, it feels different. I mean, we were renting in Selwood for years. And the first time I walked to downtown from where we live, people were saying hello to me on the sidewalk. And there was just this small town, it's all the stereotypical small town community experiences that I thought were just something that was made up on TV, because I had either lived in rural unincorporated areas or in larger cities my whole life prior to moving to Milwaukee. So once I realized that wasn't just a script in Hollywood, that was actually the way people could live and be a part of one another's lives and contribute to the betterment of the community, that is huge. And I do think that the secret gets out because simply there are more of us here who talk about it to our friends outside. So you end up recruiting or trying to recruit your friends to move here, and some of us are very successful at that, and some of us can't find people who can afford to buy here anymore, But it's certainly a combination of factors, and I absolutely agree with Shane that it has so many things going for it that it was just a matter of time before people started coming one way or the other. When we were looking at Milwaukee, we didn't even know that the Orange Line was coming. And now we live walking distance from the station. So we're glad to have it, but it wasn't something that brought us here.
Wilda, knowing that you're part of the Chamber of Commerce, which has been known as, well, in other regions of the country, as a conservative organization, right? And here too. Well, there's nothing in Oregon that's conservative, let's be honest with that statement. But, so do you think it's the progressive, let's be honest, Mayor Gamba was a very progressive kind of mayor and, push a very progressive agenda. Do you think that it was part of the progressive agenda that caused this switchover? Was it just the community? Or what was the guiding
I think
point?
it was like the others have mentioned. I think it was a great combination of things, sort of a confluence of circumstances that came together. Just a couple of years before that, or however many years. Actually, gosh, I think it was more than that. We had opened the Green Line MAX system in Clackamas Town Center. The Chamber of Commerce had a lot to do with that, so I was kind of on the inside of that and knew that there were other parts. The yellow line came after that. Some of the extensions to the red or blue lines, whatever. It was, pretty obvious that Milwaukie was going to be the next place for light rail. So, like I said, I think just a confluence of things. There were very divided opinions about whether or not Milwaukie was the right place for a light rail line, and I think we all know that. We all acknowledge that. But when you stop and think about it, it was time for something like that to be a part of the catalyst that helped move Milwaukie forward. And I'm trying to think, I believe we opened the Orange Line in 15, if I'm remembering correctly.
Scott's nodding, so you're right.
Oh, right, okay, yeah, in 15. I think that must have been like 10 years after we opened the Green Line. I mean, there were a lot of years in between, I remember that. But so since that was in 15, the sort of Gamba years had just barely started. And we all know, too, I think, the great emphasis that our former mayor had on climate change and being able to get in front of climate change and do some things. So that, I think, is the great legacy that he left, was more in those kinds of things. Because light rail was kind of, even when I got on council, light rail was moving down the line and it was almost, ready to open. I personally had no idea that some of the things would change as rapidly as they did, especially in the need for housing, and that the housing would not be what I would consider to be affordable housing, which is what I had hoped, that new housing in the city of Milwaukie would be a combination of kinds of things, that we could bring a variety of new people here, and realizing too that anytime, even though there was a lot more higher end housing, anytime you move people up to the higher end, it also left neighborhood homes open and empty, so that other people could buy them. I bought my home in 2005, and it was extremely affordable at that point in time. I probably could not buy it today if I needed to do that. So I think that it was this great combination, this synchronicity of having the right people, in the right place on city council and on planning commission, and working in the downtown, and all of those factors, and the kinds of things just happening that in a metro region will happen, if that all makes sense.
That totally makes sense to me. So,
Greg, before we go further, if I could, I do think it was one of the most, well, it probably was the most progressive council until the more recent council. And it.
But she was progressive.
No, she's progressive. No, I'm saying the council that I was on was very progressive compared to what it had been, and there was a quick flip, I think.
Yes.
I mean, it's just almost like that, so it was very progressive. I still think it's progressive, and I'm progressive, so this is fine with me. But it did move quickly, and perhaps at times it was maybe a little out of step with your average Milwaukeean. Maybe, I don't know, but it has moved quickly. And I also, I will have to give a lot of credit to Mark as Mayor Gamba, as someone who did a great job of seating committees and seating the planning commission, and when there was a vacancy, he wanted people that had a vision similar to his, and I think it just kind of flipped quickly, and he's great at that, by the way. I mean, he did a very good job. And then when you get those people on the council and on the planning commission, and there are more vacancies, it just kind of built upon itself. So it did move quickly, though.
Well, and one of the things that I think assisted all that, talking about Mayor Gamba, is that he is one of the most vision-oriented people I know. And I mean, in all my years of any kind of work I've done, any kind of thing I have seldom ever seen anybody that can see the end result as well as he could. And while he became mayor mid-year in 2015, he'd been on council for 2 years before that, so he'd had a lot to do with that turnover of how council went. He started it, I believe. Mm-hmm. and he continued it. But he, even when the goals were on Kellogg Creek and climate change and whatever, you knew that it was all working toward a specific end, a place where we now in many ways are, but we're still striving to get there because Mark is so vision oriented. I'm task oriented, not as vision oriented as he is. And as I was reading through this, and I see we're talking about goals later, and that all to me fits together with how all that happened.
Yeah, there are times when Mark moves quicker than I would. And there were times when I was like, hold on, Mark, hold on. This is going way too fast, too far. But I admire that he has that vision and he pushes and he made me look at things differently.
Yeah, well, and one of the notes that I put down on my notes, and we were talking about this issue and others, is that from the very beginning, City Council was, and I believe still is, a lot of compromise. Mm-hmm. You want X, Y, Z. Would you be happy taking Y, Z, and instead of X, we'll do something else? There was great discussions about compromise, and that I think is what helped move us all forward all the time.
So that actually that brings up a really interesting point because even Outcast says that
I don't know what that is.
Roses don't. Roses, sometimes roses smell like poo-poo. So you guys probably were not always in agreement, no matter how much praise that we have given this administration so far. So talk us about the time, because I know that you guys have all been sitting in a room at some. And look, I actually got to serve with Shane and Wilda on the Planning Commission. That's how old I am. On the Planning Commission, I was the last one by Ferguson to actually be put on there. He was our former mayor before Gamba. And so we've argued, we've had discussions. Tell me about some times where there was times that when you guys couldn't agree on everything, right? And how did those discussions go? What were the issues? And how did that end up resolution talk about? You were talking about a lot of compromise, so I'd love to get deeper into that topic.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I think one of the things that I stood up for more so, other folks didn't quite come along with me, is when we adopted the policy for home energy score. I still think that it's not valuable and not as important to have as maybe some other things. And basically what it is you have this score on everything to deal with your house, on where you are in utilization of energy, and so are you a more lower energy home or a higher energy home or something. My thinking through this whole thing was, so they wanted to charge $200 or $150 or whatever for anybody to have this done, and I'm like, if I'm at the point where I have to sell my home, I may not be able to afford $150 or $200. This just does not sit well with me, and I didn't think that it would sit well with the residents of Milwaukie to have to pay to do something extra to put your home up on a for sale, sign and talk to a real estate agent, whatever. And I truly couldn't see the real reason for having this home energy score done, and Kathy was great at explaining it to me. She helped me through the process a lot. What we finally came up with, and I'm probably not going to remember it all correctly, but there's a low income faction built into it now, and there's opportunity for people to not have to pay that, or if they pay it, it's offset with something back from the city, and that. But I don't think that would have happened if we hadn't compromised, if we hadn't talked things through. I mean, we had tons of this seemed like a really small thing, but at the time it was really bugging me, quite frankly. And we had a lot of discussion on the dais about this and why we should have this and why we shouldn't. I look at real estate ads all the time just because I think they're fascinating, and I have only seen, I think, 2 that in this past couple of years that even mentioned home energy score. So I still kind of don't think it's really important, but that's me.
So, Councilor Hyzy, what'd you do? Offer a box of roses? Right? I mean, how did you get her to come onto your side? I mean, and how do you negotiate those other things out with, let's say, residents like me who may not believe in some of the progressive movement kind of ideas?
I didn't think to offer a box of roses. Wilda's more a cookies kind of person. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, obviously, Wilda still has her feelings about it, and if I were to go back in time and knowing what I know now about how difficult that conversation would be, I probably would have prioritized something else out of our 53 actions that we identified within our climate action plan. Some of the reasons that I supported it at the time were I thought this would be low-hanging fruit. This was a program that was already well established in Portland, and it's a program that is one of the few tools we have to help educate people who are buying their homes about the energy costs. And I think that's some of what did appeal to Wilda, is she was really looking at it from the perspective of a homeowner and worried about the costs that a homeowner might have to pay at a time when they're in crisis and really need to be reaping money as every cent that they possibly can. And I was looking at it from the perspective of someone who's buying a house and going, well, I don't have a reliable way to look at different homes and know what my energy costs are going to be. So going forward, this could cost me a lot of money. And it's $150 for the seller, but for the buyer, it has the potential to save you thousands. If that's something you're interested in, you can then go, oh, this house has a really low energy score. I gotta think about whether or not I want that, or if I do buy that house, I know that there are some improvements I need to make in order to bring my monthly bills down. So you just, some of what you get out of having 5 people on the dais is you do get those different perspectives, and you get different stories that you go, oh, I see where you're coming from, and then you just kind of figure it out along the way. And it was also one of the first things we did out of the climate action plan. So I think we were breaking ground in a lot of ways, and I hope that staff in particular has learned from that experience of, this is more enforcement work than we might have realized. It does actually show up more often than that, but you have to look in the right place to see it show up.
I'm looking at.
No, I mean in the types of listings.
Oh, in the yeah.
It affects where it shows up. So,
yeah.
So sometimes you do something, particularly when it's a new program for the city, and you don't necessarily know. I have frequently on the dais said, I don't know, we'll see. If it doesn't work, we can come back and we can make it better, or we can not do it, or whatever.
So Shane, are you telling me that it is a lie that the Chicago style of sitting in the back room with a bottle of whiskey and smoking cigarettes, working out deals before you get to city council is not true? Or does some of that go on, do you think?
I don't think it goes on like maybe people think it does. There are compromises, as Wilda said, and I am, by the way, all for compromises. I am not a purist in ideology if it means that we're not going to get things done, because sometimes you move the ball forward slower than you'd like, but you move it forward. So I am a compromiser, and I think that once you serve with someone for a while, I didn't get the pleasure of serving with Kathy, so I did with Wilda, but after a while you kind of know what what's really important to your fellow councilors, and they know what's important to you, and there is a give and take. We also, if you're not watching the work sessions, which most people don't probably watch the work sessions, there's some give and take there as we're discussing. That's when you first start to hash out, where am I and where are my fellow councilors on this? But I would know what was important to Mark. He knew what was important to me. And then at council, you also have those further discussions. There were also some emails and phone calls where you would actually lobby. But to me, I don't recall a time when I ever traded a vote and said, if you vote for me here, Mark, and I'll vote for you on that. I don't think that ever happened that I recall. But in the back of my mind, I may be thinking, well, I'm going to give Mark this one, or Lisa Beatty, or whomever, because I know that they're going to support something that I'm passionate about, that's coming down the road that they've already heard a little bit about. So that kind of thing does happen for sure, I believe. But I never traded votes. I didn't do that. I don't know if you felt that way. So there is a lot of compromising. I also will say that I work at, like I said, I work at Metro, and there's sometimes a feeling that by the time that they get to the dais, the Metro councilors, the decision has been made, and I do not see a lot of discussion that happens at the dais. Whereas I saw it at Milwaukie, I've seen it at smaller cities, and I don't know what the dynamic is and why that is, but I felt like we had good discussions at City Council. We debated things, we made motions. I don't see that where I work as much. They do a lot of their decision-making and then talking amongst staff before they ever get to the dais, and sometimes I wish there was a little bit more public discussion about certain issues. So I think Milwaukie did a really good job of that. And I also want to say that on the 2 years that I was on council, they weren't just my colleagues and my city councilors, they were my friends, and we would do things socially. I enjoyed all of them. It was a great council, and it was just a wonderful group of people. So we didn't have arguments, we didn't have fights, and if we disagreed, we did it respectfully, and we tried to reach compromises. It was really a fantastic 2 years for me on that council. Awesome.
So it truly was what you saw on MTV, Milwaukie Television, that it was, and you still see it today, right? That the discussions that you have are true discussions, and that somebody may just hold their nose and say no to a vote, and then that's just the way that it kind of goes, and you just kind of say, okay, we'll work on the next one, right? Kind of deal.
And before we go further, I want to say one other thing. Sometimes people talk about, there should be term limits or whatever, and I think we already have built-in term limits. It's called a vote. And if you don't like who's on that council, don't vote for that person. And so when I hear sometimes they say, the council went too left, or the council's too right, or whatever, don't vote for those people then if it's too left or right for the community. The community's voting. So I always felt like I needed to be honest with myself. I was representing my constituents, but also I had some ideas of where things should go. And if enough people didn't agree with me, then they'd vote me out. And I was fine with that. I didn't need to be on council just to be on council.
Yeah, amen to that.
All right, I like to hear that. All right, speak your voice, right, and let the people follow, right? Good for you. So, what was one of your biggest successes, right? So, what happens in these processes, which people may not know, is that as a councilor, especially in Milwaukie, right, has an opportunity to create kind of some legislation, right, to create some groundswell. So, and the residents have that opportunity too. Like, for example, I'll never forget during Wilda and Councilor Parks and Councilor Abma's time, I brought forth a ban the plastic bag, which basically the most progressive, most environmental council said, screw you, which I was surprised about. So I made it my mission to prove it, and then I find out later that Council Abma actually wrote the code for the Portland metro area, which I actually copied and just put it into our language when I handed it to him. It still had some flaws, but right? Are there instances that that you tried for something and it just kind of never went anywhere? Or was there a time that you tried for something that went somewhere that created a great policy, a resolution, or some sort of ordinance that you started personally from your own groundswell? Whomever, go ahead, Councilor Hyzy.
I wouldn't describe it quite in those terms, but during a lot of my term was dominated by the work of adopting a new comprehensive plan, which we had not done in 30 years, and you're supposed to do it every 10. according to state law. And for those of you who don't know, comprehensive plan is effectively a land use overview document. And Oregon has pretty unique land use laws. And so it requires a municipality to look at a whole host of issues in terms of housing, and a lot of the work you do on a city council is related to zoning and how land is used. Relates to the Willamette Greenway. It has environmental impacts. It has transportation impacts. So it's this sprawling document that is required by the state and has to meet certain state standards. But the way we did it in Milwaukie was we kind of opened it up and had it be the basis for a community conversation. That was informed by before my time, the 2017 vision process. So in that conversation around the comprehensive plan, we had a lot of buy-in from community members who really saw it as a vehicle for shaping Milwaukie for the next 30 years, and a lot of passion around how do we make sure it represents all of our values, all of the values that we have named in this 2017 vision process, and in all those conversations we had in the town halls and hearings and so forth around comp plan issues. So when it came time to actually get to where we were nuts and bolts, okay, this is it, we're adopting this comprehensive plan, this 100-plus page document, we got a lot of input from some community members who felt like a DEI, a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, should be enshrined within the comprehensive plan. And it came from people that I deeply respect and who have given just huge numbers of hours to the city, people I generally agree with, but on this issue, I felt very differently. And I was very, very clear about not only feeling differently about it, but that this was not the way to succeed in what they were going for. And in fact, I felt like it would harm our efforts to make Milwaukie a place that is simply a place where everyone knows they belong. And I have seen DEI, when you reduce it to 3 letters like that, it's very easy for it to become a checkbox, and I couldn't tolerate that. I couldn't tolerate Milwaukie as a city creating something that was going to just allow the community and the city to be less accountable than I wanted them to be. And my sense was that would be the outcome of putting this into the comprehensive plan. So that was a very difficult position to hold, and I held it. And we subsequently had the time and space for further conversations amongst ourselves on council, and for staff to do more time and invest more thinking in this. This was, of course, concurrent with the time around George Floyd's murder, and when huge protests were happening in downtown Portland. It was very much on our minds and hearts. We either just had or were about to adopt an equity, inclusion, and justice goal. And when you have a council goal, there's resources that go toward that. And you're really telling staff, okay, there are 3 things we care about as a city council, and this is one of them. So it really has a lot of weight to it, and it's very important. So it was a very fraught time, but what we ultimately ended up being able to do is give staff the time to work through what it means to have that as a goal, to hire staff, and to really think about what an equity, inclusion, and justice committee would do, and how to structure it in order to not have it be a token gesture, but have it be something that engages our whole community, empowers people who are historically marginalized, and really creates opportunities for transformation of our community in ways that we have not previously really been able to support. So I'm really excited with what has happened. We have an Equity, Inclusion, and Justice Committee that sets their own agenda. They're the ones who determine what the work should be, not city council, not city staff. They're the ones who are looking at the community from their own lived experience and saying, these are the things that we care about. This is where we want our energy to go. And I feel like that was really critical for being authentic in doing the work that we need to do as a community.
So how about you, Councilor Parks? Is there a time that we're going to get into that comprehensive plan here in a bit, but was there a time that there was some sort of legislation that you wanted that either passed or did not pass, and how did you proceed with that process of either that success or that failure?
I can't really think of anything. I appreciated what Councilor Hyzy just had to say about the comp plan, because that comp plan was finished after I left council. A lot of work had been done in the few years before that. But the whole process of every piece of that, starting with the visioning plan, which included hundreds of people from the city of Milwaukee, and I felt that was extremely important, that we keep up those public meetings and we bring as many people's voices into things as we could. And that, seemed to be a general agreement that that was working, and, let's continue to do that. So I don't think I can add anything else to that at the moment. Can't think of anything.
So, Councilor Abma, you gave this Dan Bial speech about your constituents earlier. Well, you were part of the vision process as well, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. And we have to admit that was probably one of the biggest things, at least in my time in Milwaukee, that was ever taken on, right? And I remember you and I were sitting together at one of the tables, and so how did you see that visionary process? And was there something that was in there that you learned that maybe that you wanted to push for that did or did not pass? Or was there another piece of legislation that you were looking at?
No, like as with Wilda, the actual comp plan was passed after I had left, so I was a part of that beginning part where we were doing the outreach. And by the way, we won an award as the best outreach in the state of Oregon for us. So that's something that I'm still very proud of. That we and the city's still continuing to do that sort of same fantastic work. So having, I have to say too, Greg, when you were there at those tables and when showing up at those town hall type things and to seeing all the people, it was amazing to think this. We're talking about some dry stuff. Some of it's dry. It's a comp plan. And to have these people so excited about it and to be there and to have their thoughts was amazing. So I don't know that there's anything about the comp plan per se that I wanted or didn't want that I didn't see. Well, I wasn't there when it was finally voted on. That wasn't going the direction that I thought it should be going.
And so let's talk about the comp plan. So for those of you in our audience and are viewing this later, the comprehensive plan basically, in all reality, is a way to use your land use. So it decides kind of what size your lot is, what area these lots can be in, how big a building is, kind of what a building looks like, so on and so forth, to get down to the nuts and bolts. And it's a lot more complicated than that, as we all know, those that are land use nerds. And so let's talk about the comp plan, because literally that probably took 4 to 5 years to kind of work all the way through. So, right, Councilor Parks, you were at the beginning. Councilor Shane, you're kind of in the beginning and in the middle, and then Councilor Hyzy, you come into the back end as councilors, not as involved residents. So let's kind of start about the beginning of that process, Councilor Parks. How did that momentum build that say, hey, you know what, we're actually going to do our comp plan, Because it is required every 10 years, but it's generally ignored, that requirement. So how did that momentum build, and why do you think the reason why that momentum got built?
Well, as I think back on it, I believe that it came together for a couple of reasons. One was that we were beginning to hone in on goals, and one of those goals started with a vision plan. And once we did the vision plan, and then we saw what the next steps were, and it was kind of like a progression. You just keep moving forward. It's back when, we did, in the very beginning, we established the Urban Renewal District. We did the visioning plan. We established a new downtown plan, that kind of thing. And so I think it was just a natural progression that, we've got all this, now we need to make sure that we update the comp plan. And we knew that these other pieces had to come first. And we also knew that updating the comp plan was not something that would be accomplished in 6 months, 1 year, 5 months, whatever. We knew that it was a very detailed and aggressive project, Deals a lot with, like you said, of course, it's a land use document, but one of the things that I found of special interest is in dealing with the housing needs, because I'm still one of those that's looking for a variety of housing. And the fact that we were actually ahead of the state when the state said single-family residential housing areas, now need to include, duplexes, triplexes, things like that. We were already thinking that and already working towards that when the state came down with that edict and said, this is what needs to happen. And we're like, well, yeah, it makes good sense. We're already doing that. So again, progression, that was the natural steps to getting to the conclusion that we'd all been working so diligently towards.
So, Councilman, while you're in the middle of this comprehensive plan work, and so we talk about this 26 meetings a year, which probably during that time probably tripled or quadrupled the amount of meetings that you had per year. I mean, you're almost working at one meeting a week. Did you ever say, I can't wait to get to the end of this? Or did you say, I'm so thankful for the public involvement that is extending the amount of time that we are working on this? Because there must have been 4 or 5 different committees that were working, and then it finally came up to one committee. And then even afterwards, there was an implementation committee that was added on to make the rules for what we had, as the residents had decided on. So what are your kind of thoughts about that, about, The time commitment? Yeah, well, was it worth the effort while you were kind of going through it,
I absolutely think it was worth the effort to get the community input on how this is such an important document. The comprehensive plan's huge, and as Kathy said, you're supposed to do it every 10 years, and we hadn't done it for 30, so it needed quite a bit of updating. It is, but this also goes to a larger issue that I just want to say, that being on city council, if you do it right, it's a lot of damn work. It's a lot of work, and you may just look at the person who's there for the 2 or 3 or 4 hours at the city council meeting, but there's a lot of other meetings that you're doing prior to that. Those packets are big. There's a lot of reading involved. It's a big job, and it's an exciting job. But it's like a job it added another half job to my already daytime job. And unfortunately, I think that keeps some people away from it just because of the workload. And I hope that we're doing a better job. I think we brought in some new people that it's really exciting to see some of the people that are still stepping up to the plate for that. But it's a big job. There were a lot of meetings. I was in the beginning of that, Greg, so I did not have to do as many meetings as I think Wilda and Kathy would have to do. I mean, I did some of those town halls, but I think there was a lot more work that occurred after I left the council. But it is a lot of meetings, and yet it's very important.
And so, Councilor Hyzy, the DEI story that you talk about, I remember as a planning commissioner, and they brought that up, and the whole thing is, and the reason why it's so weird that we talk about it in this way is because the comprehensive plan has a statement called Goal 1, which is community involvement. And that's how they were getting, and really it's meant community involvement for land use. And I argued the same position that you did, that it's not that I'm against it, but it just, you're going to fail if you stick it in here, right? You make it the Planning Commission's duty. So as you got to the end, right, as you started to see the end results, right, as you start to see the ordinances and the land use policies and all the things, right, it up to the very bitter end, right, that we started to shrink the lots. We started to allow duplexes, triplexes, cottage clusters, all that work, right, that came through this. What do you think of the end result? And is there more that the city could focus on and do to kind of help this affordable housing issue with the land use by still satisfying the residents' feeling of this community and Mayberry-ish, right, kind of sense of wonder?
That's an easy question, Kathy.
Yeah, thanks, Greg.
Well, I mean, you can answer it either way that you want, but I guess the end is, you know, just the satisfaction of kind of getting to the end. At least you had the satisfaction of getting to the end. I know there's still a lot of work to do with it, but right, the satisfaction of getting to the end and what shouldn't we give up on, right? I guess is kind of the question.
I can't pass up an opportunity to give you a hard time. You know that.
I absolutely know that.
It was really exciting to get down to that end, and I will be honest that the second or third review of the full document was far less exciting. But the first time that we all laid eyes on that whole first complete draft together, and we had the staff report about it, it was thrilling just to go, wow, this is years of community input, hard decisions, meetings, input from Planning Commission, input from council, staff shaping this, just the sheer number of fingerprints that were on it, I think was really a testament to the value of the work and the way we did it. And my only heartburn around that is something we couldn't control, which was that we got to the wrap-up stage in the middle of a pandemic. And so we couldn't continue to have those town halls. Staff did an incredible job of trying to figure out how to do it online, and I think we did the best job we possibly could have. But it would have really been wonderful to be able to do one more town hall to just kind of say, okay, this is what we've done. How do you feel? And to have another conversation with the community about why things are the way they are in the document, because I think some of the outcomes are very challenging. Smaller lots and thinking about the way the city will change in a very concrete way is really frightening if it feels like that Mayberry-ness and that community sense is what's on the chopping block. And I personally, I wouldn't have voted for it. I wouldn't have supported it if I felt like that was the case. But my experience of Milwaukie is not that it is made up of a bunch of houses on big lots or standard size lots or single family residences or multi-family housing units or any of that. It's not actually a community that is built by buildings. The community lives in the buildings, but it is the community and it is the people who are here and it is the people who have been here for 30 or 40 years, who have raised their families here, who want their kids to be able to grow up here. I talk to high schoolers who want to live here, and I want to create a future where they can. And I want them to be able to continue to be a part of this community. And I don't want them to have to be doctors to be able to afford to live here. So for me, in order to continue to keep Milwaukie what it is, which is economically quite wonderfully diverse community for as close as it is to Portland, and that's something I cherish about it. Then that means that we have to be open to thinking about our land use differently. Because right now, the way we use our land has become a barrier for making it a place that is truly accessible for the people who have always been a part of the community and who want to keep being a part of the community. And the new people, you know. So I think that's really the thing that that I took away from the comp plan is communities are always changing. They are always changing at paces that we sometimes can see and oftentimes at paces we can't see. And when you talk about change in this way that makes it visible, it's frightening. But the thing is, we make those choices. And if we choose not to change in the ways we chose in that comprehensive plan, then we move in the direction of Lake Oswego, which is a wonderful community. Don't get me wrong. I love Lake Oswego for what it is, but it is not Milwaukee. I live in Milwaukee because I love Milwaukee. If I wanted to live in Lake Oswego, I would figure out a way to be able to afford it, you know? So that's just the place I always come back to when talking about how the comprehensive plan really, how important it is to Milwaukee being what it is today and how much it can be that in the future.
So I have about 5 more minutes, and I have one more topic to get to, but I'm going to open the floor to questions. Does anybody have any questions or comments or anything?
I'd like to start with a comment. I'd like to thank you for all you've done. I know it's basically a volunteer job, and it's spectacular how much energy and everything you put into it. I'm a little curious if you think the presence of the Portland Waldorf School, having moved to Milwaukee, affected it in any way.
Affected the city of Milwaukee?
I didn't quite hear the question. I'm a little hard of hearing.
I'm sorry. So
Will you rephrase?
the
Yeah.
Portland Waldorf School, right, which came in 2015, 2014? It was right before the light rail came in almost.
What?
It was
Portland-
Bernard, I guess. Bernard, during the Bernard.
Portland Waldorf School was a long time before that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. How did that help change the demographic of Milwaukee? Did its influence change? The school itself changed the influence to Milwaukee?
I think it, in my personal opinion, I think that it probably gave the city of Milwaukee, in people's minds, it gave them sort of a higher, it gave Milwaukee a higher position. I don't know quite how to say that. It's like, oh, that's the home of Portland Waldorf School. That's way cool. You know, that's an elite school. It's for, you know, kids that have exemplary, you know, opportunities in a variety of arts and, you know, one sciences and one thing and another. And it's a private school and that. And if I remember correctly, and I may be wrong, so somebody that knows this, you know, tell me, I believe that's also when Mark Gamba moved to town because his children went to Portland Waldorf School. So that was certainly a plus for the city of Milwaukee, you know, but I think it's, I mean, even now, I have great grandsons that live here now, and luckily we do have the Milwaukee Academy of the Arts and Sabin Schellenberg centers, but if not, I would, you know, hope that maybe my grandkids could go to Portland Waldorf School, because I understand it's smaller classes, it's more suited for people that don't do as well in the regular classroom and that type of thing. But I remember when all that happened, the city wanted to put a bid in on it, but couldn't get it together, and the Portland Waldorf School group came forward first, and one thing and another. It was a very unhappy time in Milwaukee, very sort of sad that, you know, people felt that it would be a detriment rather than a benefit. But I think it's, in my personal opinion, I think it's been a benefit to the community.
Right, because at the same time you had Main Street Village, where the beer store and the Thai restaurant is, and the coming in, which was a big change. And Safeway was getting torn down. I mean, there were
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot of memories getting turned over at that. And if you don't know anything, that building used to be the former junior high, so there was a lot of tie with that, a lot of emotional response over. Anybody else have any comments about the Waldorf School?
You know, when it comes to those opportunities to purchase land, like it's in the heart of the downtown area, it's this beautiful green space it's a building that feels like it has all this potential. It always hurts a little when you miss those opportunities just because who knows what the city could have done with that. But it is also so hard in a time when city revenues are always being squeezed ever tighter by the restraints of measures 5 and 50 on our budgets. It's ever more difficult to get the just capital set aside to make that happen. I mean, it was an incredible, artistic, wondrous thing that our city manager and finance manager were able to figure out how to finance buying that city hall building, buying the Advantis building. And that opportunity was only presented to the city because Advantis is a credit union, and so they have a mission to, you know, kind of do good in the community. So they said, hey, you guys, you know, you want the first crack at this. So we had the opportunity as the city to, you know, have a little time and get in there and buy it at a price that was astonishingly reasonable for what that building is. But that was a one-off, you know, that was like a bureaucratic miracle, you know? So I think it would have been wonderful to be able to purchase that property when it became available. Different things happened. The Waldorf School has been a wonderful neighbor to the city in many ways. We've used that property for town halls. A lot of us have walked the campus and recreated there. So who knows what could have been.
Councilor Abma, any remarks on that?
No, Waldorf, that preceded me.
So I'm going to close up the program, and I'm going to dive into my last commercial here before we close out. So, Councilor Abbott, do you have any closing? First of all, I want to thank all of you for your service, right? We may have never agreed on everything. We agreed on a lot. And the residents of Milwaukie may not have agreed on everything, but we agreed on a lot. And all of you sitting up here were a piece and a part of that, and we as residents of Milwaukie should be thankful of that. So I want to thank you for your service, for all the councilors that spend their time working for us residents. It is just simply a joy to see the product that comes out in the end. Really, I mean, yeah, change is hard, change has to happen, and with leaders like you, change can actually develop so that it's good for everybody, right? So, Councilor Abma, do you have any closing remarks that you would like to?
Just again, thank you for having us. I appreciate it, Greg, and I had a great time on the city council. That's all I can say is that I loved it. I loved working with my colleagues. I loved having a voice in the community in the future where my city was going to go. It was an awesome time, and I hope that people continue to step up and run for office. We have a really good council now. I think it's great. So that's all I would say is just it was a really, really fun time. And you see the city so differently. Once you get on council, then you see a stop sign, you see you see a fence, you see a piece of vacant land. Everything changes in your mind as to how this can be. What is this? You know, it's a very different thing. Yeah, and then I would come home in the evenings especially after city council meetings. I don't know about you. And my husband would say, "Can you just turn off Milwaukie for just a little bit? Because all I wanted to do was talk about Milwaukie and what we were doing and where we were going to go." And it was a great time. And I wish that I could have served with Councilor Hyzy. I remember, so that was my only regret.
Any other closing remarks for the councilors?
I would certainly echo what Councilor
Shane, call me Shane.
Yeah, it's like what my buddy Shane here has said, but I also want to note that the city will soon, if I understand correctly, and I haven't had any conversation with anybody, so if this is wrong, you just shake your head really violently at me, okay? The next big thing to be tackled is this Transportation System Plan, TSP. And I know that the residents of Milwaukie have a lot of thoughts about this. I mean, it's, going to have anything to do with, the egress and ingress of new development, as well as what do they do with the, streets now, and how do they take care of them and everything else. And that, so just like when Greg started this program, he talked about the boards and commissions and committees that are available for citizens to be part of. So watch for that, because that will be coming down the pike, and it's very, very important. So thank you.
The only thing I would add is thank you. It's always fun when the museum calls us up. It's always, what's on tap next? And I would just say that I guess I have a specific message for women in particular to consider running for city council. And I say that because women always need to be asked and never consider stepping up and don't realize the leadership potential or the gifts that they bring. So I do what I can to have those conversations with women in the community, but if I don't know you, this message is for you.
Well, what a wonderful lead-in. So March 7th is the proclamation for the city, hosted by the Milwaukie Historical Society on Women's History and Excellent Month. So check that out, 6 p.m. You can either join live at City Hall or watch it on Zoom, watch on City Calendar, and it will be recorded on the Milwaukie Heritage Channel just as much as this program will be for later viewing. I also want to remind our folks that the Milwaukie 2023 project is live on the Milwaukie Heritage Channel as well. Learn from your fellow residents, old-timers and new-timers, about how long they lived in Milwaukie, what's their favorite thing about Milwaukie, what their hopes for the future of Milwaukie is, and just some of the stories of what people can tell you about their lives that gives you a connection to them and your community. Before I let you go tonight, remember that June 7th is our next Ledding Library Lecture Series here inside this beautiful building, the Ledding Library. Our next lecture is entitled The Mayors. So featuring a counselor and also featuring a counselor talking about the role mayors play in our lives. Scott Stauffer will be back again to talk about a history lesson on the mayors and former mayors sharing their experiences. Right now we have Bernard, Tomei, and Gamba. So, and their stories of time in office. So do not miss us. June 7th, 6 p.m. here inside the Ledding Library on Zoom, or watch it taped on Comcast Channel 30 or Milwaukie Heritage YouTube channel when available. Once again, my name is Greg Hemer, Communications Director for the Milwaukie Historical Society, the owners and operators of the world's largest museum dedicated to the history of Milwaukie, Oregon, open Saturday, 1 to 5 p.m. Make sure you check out our summer programming every second Saturday of July, August, and September months for the performance at the museum, like our Facebook page, Milwaukie History Museum, for upcoming events and information, and visit us at milwaukeemuseum.com. Thank you all so much, and have a pleasant evening. Thank you.